Hi, I'm Lilly DeGennaro. My focus of study is veterinary medicine, so I decided to research the history and efforts to eradicate bovine tuberculosis in New Zealand. Bovine tuberculosis is an infectious disease that is caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium bovis. This disease is found in a variety of animals. It's mainly found in cattle and deer, but is not limited to those species. It also can be found in feral pigs and especially possums. So possums are actually the main carrier of bovine tuberculosis because they have very dense populations where this disease can spread pretty quickly. The disease is spread in many different ways. The main means of spreading the disease is through when an infected animal actually coughs up droplets that contain the bacterium, and then another person or animal breathes those droplets in, and then the infection is able to take place inside their body. So the symptoms of bovine tuberculosis differ for each animal. Basically in cattle and deer, it's mainly seen through lesions in the lymph nodes of the chest. These can be filled with pus, or they can be manifested as small masses, and which makes breathing very difficult. In feral pigs, this is seen in lesions in their lymph nodes, but the lymph nodes of the jaw. It can also be seen with intestinal issues, kind of the breakdown of their intestinal tract. And then in possums, which as we said are the carriers, it's seen in the swelling of the lymph nodes of the armpits and the groin, and actually eventually leads to death in most cases for the possums. So a lot of people may be wondering, can this disease affect humans too? The answer is yes. Although most developed countries, including New Zealand, have a very effective pasteurization process for their meats, and have very strict rules on what kind of food can be, processed and actually allowed to be put into market, there is always a risk for it to be spread. This can be through infected meat or milk, or even things like hunters handling infected possums, and getting exposed to droplets that way. So now that we know a general baseline of what this disease is, we can talk about the history of the disease within New Zealand. The disease actually started in New Zealand around the 1800s when imported cattle that carried the disease were brought into the country. Throughout the history, that was the main cases of the disease at that time. But around the mid-1900s, 1953 about, there started to be cases of bovine tuberculosis within the wildlife of New Zealand, specifically in deer. And then in 1967, the first case was seen in a possum. So since then, the disease has been spreading from 1.4 to 4 kilometers per year, varying on how different the densely populated forest areas are. So now we can look at what is the means of eradicating this disease in New Zealand. Basically, the people of New Zealand, the government has been partnering with the agricultural industry to basically figure out a way to fix this. The disease has not been eradicated fully in any country except for Australia, although there have been efforts in other countries as well. So New Zealand has decided to use something called rollback eradication. This basically means that of the 4 areas in New Zealand that contain bovine tuberculosis in large amounts, they are going to try to basically work from the outside of the area in to eradicate the disease in each area individually. So what they'll do is they'll take one of those areas, eradicate it locally, and then that will eventually lead to total eradication. And the way that they do this includes something called proof of freedom. So if you look here, you can see that proof of freedom includes 4 basic parts. The first part is surveilling and eliminating infected possums specifically. The second one is assessing the livestock of the area, specifically cattle and deer. The third one is finding the effective stopping threshold of the disease to determine if it's eradicated. So this basically means the number of animals that are still affected, finding out what the lowest number they can have is to make sure that it is in fact gone from that area. And then the fourth and final one is determining how that local eradication can contribute to eradicating the disease totally in the whole country. So now that we know what they're trying to do, we can look at the progression of, eliminating this disease. So there have been many successes within this process. In 2016, there was a reduction in the amount of cattle that were infected with the disease. It went, the threshold that we were talking about earlier to stop, that determines whether an area locally has been rid of the disease, is 0.2%. And New Zealand in 2016 saw a rate of 0.09%. So even though it's still there, they are making progress based on what kinds of levels they set for themselves. There also has been a severe reduction in numbers from the 1900s or mid-1990s specifically. There were about 1,700 cases of infected cows, and as of 2017 there were only 53. So this is a pretty significant reduction in the amount of cattle affected. There also has been nearly a fourth of the areas of infection that has had the disease eradicated. Now that we know what's going on, we can talk about why they're trying to eradicate it, why it's important. And I look at this based on three different things. So first of all, we can start small and look at the individual impacts of having such a heavily prevalent disease affect livestock. So first of all, if diseases are affecting farmers' products, then they're gonna kill the cattle, there's gonna be sick animals, they're gonna have severe financial detriments to themselves because of what's happening to their livestock. Secondly, we can look at the effects on health for humans based on the fact that, if these livestock are being infected, there's going to be infected meat being sold, infected milk being sold, that will threaten human health as well. And then thirdly, which we'll look at a broad point of view, is the economic effects for New Zealand itself, who relies on selling venison, beef, and dairy to other countries. If they're having infected meat, milk, and things like that, then other countries may not want to buy those things because they think they have a very poor quality. So basically, looking at all of this, you can kind of get an idea of why it's so important to eradicate this disease totally from New Zealand, not only for the health of the animals, but for the impact that it has on humans and the economy of the country itself. Thank you.